Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Samantha Leighanne and I talk about books. It's officially April and that means that it is time for my March wrap up. March was a really crazy month for me reading wise. I'm not really 100% sure how I got so much read, but I did get a lot of stuff read. So since I have so many things to talk about, I'm not really going to be going into too much depth as far as synopsis and things like that go. I may give you a general idea of what the book might be about, but I'm not going to be going into super detail. So for the month of March, I read 18 books. 18 books! But of those 18 books, 6 were audiobooks, 3 were ebooks, and 9 were physical copies. Quick disclaimer about the 9 physical copies, 5 of those were graphic novel volume bind-ups, which I will talk about in a few minutes, but of those physical copies, I read 2,565 pages. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the books. The first book that I actually listened to on audio was The Unseen World by Liz Moore. I did briefly talk about this in a Friday Reads video that I did. I don't remember the narrator's name, but the narration was just okay. It wasn't great. I feel like if she had put a little bit more feeling into her reading, then maybe I would have connected to the characters a little bit more. As it stands, I ended up giving this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was okay. It wasn't great. It wasn't my favorite. This book is very character driven. One thing that I feel like it does a very good job of is depicting what it's like to live with someone who has Alzheimer's and really what kind of toll that can take on a family. So in this book you had your main plot and that was done, pretty well. I enjoyed that main plot. There were a couple of little side plots that were happening that I didn't really care very much for, that I felt like could have been completely left out. And had those little side stories been taken out a little bit more, I feel like it just would have been a better book overall. It does wrap up in a nice neat little bow, which, for the most part I did appreciate, but so 3.5 out of 5. Not sure if I would read it again. A lot of people really liked this book after I finished it. I read some reviews. A lot of people had really positive things to say about it. It just wasn't really my cup of tea, so. But you might like it, so. Today's coffee cup. I am a cat mom. I'm obsessed with my cat. So the next things that I read are the graphic novels that I had previously mentioned, and that is the Dark Tower, The Gunslinger Born bind-ups. There are 5 volumes. Love the artwork in this. I love the story. If you have read the Dark Tower series and you enjoyed that series, I highly recommend reading these graphic novels. This is a little bit further look into our main character Roland and his early life. So a lot of the things that we see from the Dark Tower book Wizard and Glass, we do see in the graphic novel bind-up, as well as getting a little bit further detail, some things that weren't included in Wizard and Glass. So the 5 volumes, I'm not gonna go into any further detail about any of them because it's just following the story, but you have the Gunslinger Born, you have The Long Road Home, Volume 3 is Treachery, Volume 4 is The Fall of Gilead, and Volume 5, The Battle of Jericho Hill. Now there is a whole other series that actually does follow the adult version of Roland. I do not have any of those volumes, but I really would like to get them, so maybe you guys will see that on my channel at some point. The next book that I read was also on audio. It is Trigger Warning by Neil Gaiman, Short Fictions and Disturbances. This is just a collection of short stories, and not only is it short stories, there's a little bit of poetry, and it's all different genres, which I really did appreciate. I gave this 3 stars. It wasn't the best short story collection that I have ever read. I am actually a really big fan of short story collections. There's some people that don't like them, but I actually really do. There were some of the stories that were included in this that I really, really enjoyed. Other ones not so much. They weren't very memorable. For those of you that like American Gods, there actually is a story about Shadow Moon in this particular collection, and I did enjoy that one. I would recommend reading that. If I did not mention already, it is also narrated by Neil Gaiman, and I could just listen to that man talk all day long. He's wonderful when it comes to narration, so I recommend the audiobook version, if for no other reason, just that I absolutely love the sound of Neil Gaiman's voice. It was still good. If you like Neil Gaiman, I would definitely read this. I definitely want to pick up more of his other short story collections, so. The next book that I read was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This was 5 stars. I loved this book. It was absolutely excellent. I read this in conjunction with Krista at Books and Jams for her read along. I will make sure that I link her channel below as well as the Goodreads group. It's really awesome because it's kind of a read at your own pace kind of thing. So you can read that in conjunction with, you know, whatever else you're reading. So that is really nice. But this book, the writing was absolutely beautiful. I loved the characters. I loved the way that the author made all the characters interconnect. The writing was very atmospheric. It had this really creepy vibe to it, which I just loved. It is set in kind of a post-apocalyptic almost universe. It's basically set after the super flu has decimated most of the population and really what society looks like after the fact. So that aspect of it was really interesting and I definitely really enjoyed that. But like I said, storytelling, characters, atmosphere, writing, all of that was excellent. All of it was beautiful. Highly recommend. 5 stars. The next book that I listened to was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. 5 stars. Loved this book. It was absolutely wonderful. If you are a fan of science fiction, you should read this. If you are not a fan of science fiction, you should read this. This for me was a really great reintroduction to that genre because it's not something that I really read a whole heck of a lot of, but I really, really loved it. I actually did a full spoiler-free review, which I will go ahead and link up above if you want to watch that. So I'm not going to go too much further into my thoughts. If you want to know how I felt about it, you should definitely watch the review. The next book that I read was on ebook format, and that was Number the Stars by Lois Lowry. This was a book from my childhood. It was like on super sale on the Kindle store one day, and I was like, oh, let me just go ahead and download that. And I couldn't sleep one night, and I read it in one sitting. And I loved that book as a child, and I still really enjoy it as an adult. It is a book about a young girl in Denmark during the Nazi occupation, and her best friend and their neighbors are Jewish, and it is a really good story about how even when you are afraid, you can still be brave and you can still do great things. So 5 stars. I highly recommend. It's a really great children's classic. The next book was another audiobook, and it was Juliet Takes a Breath, a Gabby Rivera novel. And this book got 4 out of 5 stars. The narration was excellent. The book is written in first person, so I really felt like it was the character in the book, Juliet, actually speaking, and so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. It was a book that was important to me for multiple reasons. The number one reason being that it really does talk about feminism and the intersectionality of feminism. The fact that as a white woman, it can mean one thing to me, but it means something entirely different for women of color, for trans women, and things like that. And that as a white woman, I need to recognize that feminism means different things for different people. And that in order to be a good ally to these people, I have to recognize that. So it was really eye-opening for me. There were a lot of times where I was like listening to it and I'm like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And I did a Friday Reads video where I think I'm a little bit more articulate about that kind of thing. So I'll go ahead and link that either up above or in the down bar below. But I definitely really enjoyed it. It was, if you were looking to read more diversely, then you should definitely read this as well. It is also Own Voices if you are trying to read Own Voices authors. So I definitely recommend it. The next book was Uncaged Wallflower by, what is that person's name? Janae Cecilia. Sorry, I read this on ebook format and it was just okay. It is a poetry collection and that's about all I can really tell you. It is very short. It's less than 100 pages. I just did not connect with this form of poetry. I don't know why I didn't connect. It does have very high reviews on Goodreads and things like that, so there are a lot of people that do connect well with it. I just unfortunately wasn't one of them. So by no means am I saying don't read this. You should absolutely read it. Hopefully you can connect with it better than I did, but it just wasn't for me, so I ended up giving it 2 stars. The next book that I listened to was The Circle by Dave Eggers. For those of you that are unaware, this is being made into a film with Tom Hanks, Emma Watson, and the dude from Star Wars whose name I can never ever remember. I hated this book. I gave this book 1 star. Okay, I did listen to it on audio and the narration wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. I don't remember the narrator's name, so please forgive me on that front. But I hated this book, and I think one of the reasons that I feel so strongly about how much I hated it was because the original concept was so good and it was something that he could have done so much with, and he didn't. It just fell flat on his face, and that just like angered me in a way that I cannot explain. I did not like any of the characters. None of the characters were likable. The pacing was a little bit weird at certain points. There were things that were included that I feel like just should have been left out. The dialogue between the characters was extremely robotic in a way that I don't think it was meant to be robotic. The metaphors that were used for the concepts were just so tropey and awful, and it could have been so much better than it was. And that is the thing that just gets me, is because it could have been so much better. It could have been this amazing concept. And honestly, I feel like I still want to see the movie, because I can tell from the trailers and I can tell from the book that I read that it is going to be very, very different. The film and the book are going to be very different, because I think that the filmmakers probably recognized what trash this book was. I say that, but there are a lot of people that actually enjoyed that book or kind of had like middling feelings about it. But I think that it just made me angry, because I loved the idea of the concept and it just didn't do anything for me. He really failed me on that. So anyways, 1 star. If you like this book, I'm not knocking you. Good for you. I can't get down with this book, so sorry. The next book was another audiobook, and that is A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. This was also narrated by Rachel Dulude, who was the first person who narrated Small Angry Planet. So, of course, the narration was spot on. I definitely did enjoy this book. This is the second book in the Wayfarer series. Technically, it could be considered a standalone from my understanding. However, I really feel like you're not going to really understand the book unless you read Small Angry Planet first. Not to mention, there's also like spoilers for Small Angry Planet. So you should definitely read Small Angry Planet first, even though this could be considered a standalone. Hopefully that makes sense. But really enjoyed this book. I did enjoy Small Angry Planet just a little bit more than this one. I think because we were focusing in this book on 2 characters versus the whole crew in Small Angry Planet, that it kind of was missing a little bit of something for me. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I think that it's just like those character interactions and things. Like, you have your couple of main characters in Closed and Common Orbit, but there's a much wider, broad spectrum in Small Angry Planet, and so I think that's what was missing for me. Don't get me wrong, I still really enjoyed this book. I still gave it 4 stars, but if I had to choose between the 2, Small Angry Planet is definitely just a little bit better, but you should definitely read both of them. So now we get to most of the physical books that I read for the month. The next book that I read was The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, and this book is so hyped right now, with good reason. I'll usually wait until the hype dies down for a book, just because a lot of times I feel like hype will kind of shape, you know, your expectations, and, you know, can lead you to be a little bit more disappointed in a book than you would have normally been, or could maybe blind you a little bit to some of the flaws that are in that book. I feel like that does happen a lot. I don't think that that happened with this book. This book is fucking important, okay? Like, that's just, there's no other way to put it. This book is important. This book deals with a lot of really sensitive issues, a lot of really important issues. And for me, as a white person, I needed to read this. This provided me with a little bit more insight and a little bit more education, to be completely honest. Not to mention that I am also an LEO wife, so this also did, you know, affect my perspective in that way as well. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. I feel like at some point this should be required reading. Everybody needs to read this. Like, I need you to pick this book up, okay? Just do it. Just read this beautiful book. I love it. I loved the characters. I loved everything about this. Yes, read this book. It is so good. The next book is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is 5 stars. This is part of my retro rereads project for this year, so this was my pick. It is super short, and it has been so many years since I've read this, so I really did enjoy the read through. I feel like because I read it so many years ago, you know, like the refresh, and I feel like I got more out of it. It is a wonderful example of Gothic literature. It is a great classic. Highly recommend reading it, so you should read this. The next book is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. This book got 4 out of 5 stars for me. I really enjoyed this one. It is not very long. It's less than 300 pages, but it is the story of a biracial family in the 70s, and the oldest daughter has died. That is not a spoiler for you, by the way, but this book provided a lot of insight on racism in the 1970s, as well as misogyny in the 1970s. And also the dangers of living vicariously through your children, and the dangers of not letting your children being their own person. The writing in this was really good. I definitely really enjoyed that aspect of it. The characters were well fleshed out. Sometimes the pacing was a little bit slower. I feel like it had to be a little bit slower so you could actually get the full emotion of it, if that makes any sense at all. Definitely really enjoyed this one. This is another diverse read, so if you are looking to read more diversely, I highly recommend this one. And we come to the last book, and this book is Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. This book is extremely short, and this book is fucking weird. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It was fucking weird, but I really liked it in a way that I cannot fully explain. This is a diverse read in the fact that the main character is actually on the ace spectrum. She is asexual and does talk a little bit about that. Not a lot, but it's still in there. Basically, this is about a school for children who have fallen into another world. They have lived there, kind of akin to Alice falling down the rabbit hole, and they have lived there and they have come back and they don't know how to move on with their lives. Honestly, because the book is so weird, I'm having like trouble articulating like exactly how I feel about it, but it's really good. I really loved the characters. I really loved the characters, and I really loved the writing, and those were the 2 biggest points for me. I believe that this is a series, and I think the second one is out. I don't know how many books are supposed to be in the series though, but I would definitely like to continue reading it. So guys, that's it. That's all I have for you. I tried to be as concise as possible so this book wouldn't be like a zillion years long, but it's looking like it might be a zillion years long. So if you had stuck around to the end, I super appreciate you. As always, if you like what you see and you want to see more, make sure you give this video a big thumbs up and click subscribe if you have not already. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and I will see you all next go around. Bye.